Who am I? I'm Deepa. I am one of the QE developers at Adobe. I enjoy building websites. And apart from building and testing, I also work with communities. I'm one of the organizers at Google Developer Group's NSA chapter. I'm an active member at Women Who Code. And I'm also an ambassador at Google Women Tech Makers. So every slide would have a Twitter handle on the right top, and you can also connect with me in LinkedIn. So what is that I expect out of this talk? Beforehand, I would want you to have some knowledge about core JavaScript, ES6 features. I'm not going to go over this, but we'll be using those. And a small amount of CSS as well. So this talk is packed with a lot of information. Please hold on to it. We'll be starting with the intro, and then we'll talk about core features. We'll have a small code along at the end. And from there, what are the next steps for you to advance your React knowledge? And then we'll wrap it up with a Q&A at the end. So what is React? React is a JavaScript library for building beautiful UI. React runs on the front end as a single page application, but it can also be used as a full stack application by communicating with server APIs, popularly known as merge stack. Sometimes it is also referred to as a framework because it's always compared to Angular and Vue.js. So Angular has a built-in routing capabilities, which React does not. And you need to install the routing package if you want to make it work. So hence, we'll stick onto the official website. It is referred to as a JavaScript library, and it's been created by Meta or Facebook. It was open sourced in March of 2013. So I picked this graph from NPM. Here, if you see, the graph shows that the number of downloads that React has over the past 5 years, it's over 12 million downloads so far. So clearly it shows that React is way ahead in the game, along with Angular and Vue. So why React? We talked about it, it's popular. React is the Vue part of the MVC design pattern, and every component in React is dynamic, and it has its own state and data. So you don't need to separate out markups, which is particularly handled by JSX, which I'll be talking about very shortly. And apps built with React are very interactive because it uses something called this virtual DOM. Virtual DOM only updates the part that needs to be updated on a web page without reloading the whole page. So which is a huge benefit when it comes to the performance of the application. So, and also it is easy to manage data in React using one-way data binding, as all the data is in state and it's immutable. So, but if you want to recreate the state, you could change it, but there are ways to do it. But in general, it is all the states are immutable. So finally, it's a most popular open source UI library out there with a huge community support. So what are the popular websites that use React? You have Airbnb, Tesla, Atlassian, etc. So how do you get started with developing React apps? You can use standalone IDEs. I personally use Visual Studio. For this talk, I would be using a browser IDE called Code Sandbox. And inside, if you're using VS Code, you need to have Node.js. And when you install using NPM, you by default, when you create a React app, it uses Yarn. If you want to use node modules, I use node modules, so I have to use this flag. So you use NPM, and you have to separately install if you want to use other CSS libraries. I also added a YouTube video which shows the exact steps of how to do it. This is the latest one, but there are outdated ones, but this is the latest one I picked up if you want to take a look at it. So what's the project structure look like? And if you create a React project using the NPM one that I told you, so this is the project structure. And if you see at the top, you have only one index.html, and it contains only one div here. So it has an ID of root. Where is this thing used? It is used inside of index.js. This is your entry to React. So here it calls this ID, and the app here is your root component, which is found in app.js. So how do we create React app using Code Sandbox? Please let me know if you can see my screen. Can you see my screen? I don't know whether I'm sharing this, but if you're seeing this, you have to go create sandbox here, and you can, this is a browser ID where you can create applications like React, vanilla JavaScript, Vue, Angular, whatever. So this is a lightweight ID that you can get it online. So this is free, you can use it. And let's now deep dive into the core features of React. We'll be talking about all these features. Let's dive into it right away. So what is JSX? JSX is JavaScript syntax extension. It's nothing but JavaScript XML. Basically, you can think of it as a cocktail of HTML and JavaScript together inside a React application. So for example, I have a variable with a string, and then you can use it along inside a HTML tag, and you can use this as a prop. So with that said, you can have a JavaScript expression inside JSX to make it dynamic. And note that React uses React uses camel case. So in a regular HTML, you would use class, but React uses camel case. And it always returns a single element, and attributes here are in camel case. And you should follow the HTML semantics when you're using JSX as well. So how do we render elements in React? Like I said before, React uses something called as virtual DOM, and it updates only what is necessary. So now let's get a visual of this. So for example, on the left, you have React DOM, and the right-hand side, you have the browser DOM. So if you have a Facebook, if you go to Facebook and you try to add a comment, so what does React do here? It compares the comment element and its children to the previous one, and it applies the update only necessary. So it just goes ahead and updates only here, and it does not refresh the whole page. So you don't need to work with DOM APIs. You don't need to have jQuery to listen to the events. And that's how React virtual DOM works. And like I said, how does this rendering happen? It uses something called as React DOM.render inside of your index.js file. This returns an element. So here, if I go ahead and show you a code sample here. Okay, so if I go ahead and inspect. So if you see here, this is how React renders. So note that just the time only changes. The other strings, in fact, even the period is not changing here. So that's how rendering works in React. So now let's move on to component. What is a component? Component is a reusable piece of UI, which can be isolated, and then you can put it together. Think of component as a puzzle piece. Each and every puzzle piece would be a component by itself, and then when you put together, you make a web page. So every React project has app.js, which is the root component. Under the root component, you will have multiple components, which are child components, that thus forming a tree of components. So you have a nav bar, you have 3 sections and a footer, and each of them, think of it in terms of vanilla JavaScript. Each component will act as a HTML, CSS, and JavaScript file together. Okay. And now just giving a visual, another visual here. So here is the Instagram page of Airbnb. I think I picked the wrong webpage, wrong Instagram. This is the Airbnb page of inside of Instagram. So if you have to think of how components are created here, the navbar would be a separate component. The profile would be another separate component, and the middle section and the post would be separate. So as you can see that these components are separate and they're put together to build complex websites like this. And now let's see how we can create components. Components can be created using class, or you can also create it using functions. So when you create a class using, when you create a component using class, you use couple of things. You use the state and the render method, and which has a state. So earlier in React, before version 16, functional component were just used only for displaying UI, and they were stateless. So moving on to what is a state. A state is an object that holds data that might change over the lifetime of a component. So this is, if I show you an example, you would understand much better. So here is, you're creating a class component which contains a state and the render method. State represents the data we want to display when the component is rendered, and the render describes how the UI should look on the UI, on the web page, right? The render method then gives both of them together, gives a JavaScript object, which is passed on to the DOM, virtual DOM of React, and DOM then displays it in the, updates the DOM of the browser. Now, earlier, before, like I said, earlier before version 16, it was a functional component, creating a functional component was used only for static content. It was stateless. You can just display something on the page, and you can use error functions as well. So that's one thing. And I have a code sample, a quick code sample to show you as how it works. And if this thing loads up, come on, okay. Here is a class component that I've created. Here, I have created a class constructor, and then it has a state. And note that I have initialized it to default to 0. And whenever you use a constructor and this, you need to use bind to wrap it up with the bind with this keyword. And then here, if I go ahead and make a click event, it's going to update the counter using this function here. So this is how class component was created earlier. But notice that this code is super lengthy for now, and you're using a lot of this keyword here. So this is something this is something that you need to notice now. I'll be showing you something with functional component with hooks later. But earlier, before version 16, this is how functional component was used. So if you see here, functional component was just only displaying UI. So you cannot do anything. You cannot add a state to it. It doesn't change anything. This is how it was used earlier. Now, moving on to props. What are props? Props are properties that are passed into React components, and they are passed via HTML attributes. Like I said before, they're immutable and they're read-only. So here I have a element which this is the element that you would find it inside of index.js, and then here is a component that it created with greet. And what it does is the render method at the top here is called with the element, and then React calls greet component with name Deepa. So then the greet component returns the h1 tag with the result, and then finally React DOM.render method updates the DOM and displays hello Deepa in the UI. So now let's see component lifecycle. These are specifically for class components. So there are 4 steps to it. When you're creating a class component, it has four steps. So first you initialize it, then you mount it, and then you update it, and then finally you unmount it. So when you initialize it, you set props and initial state of the component inside the constructor, like I showed you before. And then mounting would call component will mount and component did mount methods. And when you're updating anything in the component, it will use something called as component will update method. And then finally, when you unmount a class component, it will unmount. It will use this method. So I have a simple code sample here, which shows whenever this page is loaded, it's going to show on the console that this has been loaded. I don't know how to get rid of this. So let me put this up here. So if you see here, I have a class component now, and then the moment the page got loaded, it shows that component did mount method here in the console. And then whenever I'm pressing this button here, it's going to show a different state, and then it's going to call these 2 methods here. So this is how class component had lifecycle. Now, so far we have seen these features. Now we'll go take a look at how can we create hooks. What are hooks? How can we create hooks? And then we'll see how to handle events, and we can also see how conditional rendering works in React. So hooks was introduced in around February 2019. And then earlier, like I said, in React 15, functional components were stateless. It was just used for displaying static content. And then if you had to write a functional component, you need to change it to a class component in that case. So then what happened is in React version 16, to add state to functional component, this feature was added. So hooks add state to functional component. Now let's see what are the basic hooks that are available. There are 3 basic hooks that are available in React: useState, UseEffect, and UseContext. So whenever you see something with use in React, those are referring to hooks. So what does useState do? UseState, as the name suggests, it tracks the state of a functional component. And this hook is used to render the UI when data changes. So it can track strings, numbers, or a combination of all of these. This hook replaces this state and this set state of a class component with a single hook call. So here is all these code samples are public. You can go ahead and take a look at them even after. So if this thing loads, come on. Okay, I have a couple of examples. So here, like I said, it adds states, right? So here I've gone ahead and first off, if you have to use useState, you need to import it along with React in your file. And then here is where I've used useState inside my component here. And then by default, the state is useState is 0, which is displayed here. And useState takes two arguments here. So one is count, which updates, if it's a variable, whenever you make a click event, it just updates it. And set count is a function that is getting invoked whenever you do a button click. So this is how, so here the set count function is set to 0 when I press reset. So if I go ahead and add or subtract, and then when I do reset, this is what happens when you use hooks. So the other example that I have here is using a object. how do you use, instead of adding a default one, here I've added an object inside of useState. So here I've added a default object. So note that I have a car and set car, and it displays it is blue Accord from 2020, right? So if I have to change this, I cannot go ahead, I cannot change here in my object itself. So if I have to change it, I have to create a function for it, and then I can go ahead and change it. So here I've had a couple of functions here, which says update the color, and then I have another function for updating the model. And note that you can also add styling inside of React. So here I've added the CSS. So if you see, I've created a variable, but in React, you make sure that it doesn't work like a regular CSS one. So here I've added a background of pink, but in CSS, you would say it as background dash color. And here it's using camel case. So if I go ahead and make a click event, it's going to show as red here. And then if I click, this changes too. So this is how useState works in useState hook works inside of a function component. Now, the next one is UseEffect. UseEffect is generally used to perform side effects in your component. It's basically whenever you want to fetch data from an API, or you want to read it from a local storage, or you want to listen to a button click, then you would use UseEffect. It's used along with useState, and here it takes two arguments. One is a function, and then there is a dependency. The dependency here is optional. You don't have to give it, but there are cases that you might need to have dependencies too. So here is a example for UseEffect. I have, again, here I have a couple of examples, one fetching data from the API and the other one for a event listener. Here is an example for, I'm using two use states here. Note that the first one I've defaulted to 0. So here is this. And then the other one, I haven't given anything, but then it gives an empty array. So what it does is it takes UseEffect has a function and it calls back. And this is the one which would be sent to effect logs, which will be printing it here. So if I go ahead and click this button here, it's going to show up here. So UseEffect, I've not added any dependencies here. You could add if you want to. It depends on the use case, but here I haven't added anything. It's optional. So this is how event listeners use effect is used with event listener. Now moving on to another example with fetching data from the API. Just give me 1 minute. So as soon as the page loaded, you saw this message here. If you see, I've used a third-party Axios here for fetching the data from the API. So you can install dependencies in Code Sandbox using this on the side. There's add dependencies. I've added Axios here. So Axios basically you can go get data from a endpoint, and then if you see here, useState is using load message function. And then here I've not added any dependencies, but this load method, what it does, it gets data and then it sends it to set message, and then the set message it sends it here to message, and then that's how it gets displayed in the UI. So there are two examples that we talked about how to fetch data from an API, and how about adding listeners to a button click. Now, the last one we are going to be talking about is UseContext. UseContext is used when you want to manage a state globally. This is mainly used if you have parent-child components which are nested together, and you usually use UseContext along with UseState. You could also use UseState alone to achieve this, but it leads into something called as prop drilling. So it's better to use UseContext in that case. So you create a context and pass them inside a child component, which I'll show you in a moment. Yeah. Okay. So okay, here is here is a parent-child function that I've created. So here is a parent one. It has a UseState with a default value, and it returns a child component, right? The child component here is getting, if you see here, the child component is using props, right? So even though I'm not using anything inside of the child component, it still uses props here. So again, if I go down one below, I have another component, which is grandchild component. And here also I'm using props dot, I'm using the same component, and then I'm using props everywhere in here along with UseState. But this is something that you have to pass props throughout this entire set of components that you have created. So to avoid this, you can use something called as UseContext, which I have an example here. If this thing loads up pretty fast. So if you see here, I've created a global object here, object as company detail context, and I've created a context as null here. So when you see here, I've used that context and use this provider, which provides the value to the context object. And here I'm not using this inside this child component, right? It's just calling the child one here, but I'm not using any context here because it doesn't need it. So if I go down, I've created a context here. I've used this UseContext here, and then I'm just using it only inside of a grandchild component. So if you see, it's instead of passing props everywhere, you just need to pass the state where it's necessary. You don't need to unnecessarily pass it inside of a child component where it was not needed before. So there are other hooks available in React. These are some of the hooks that are there. I'm not going to be talking about this, but I just wanted to mention it here that there are other hooks that you can use it for various reasons if you want to use it in your projects. And there are some rules when you use hooks. So React hooks only works at the top level of a functional component. You cannot use hooks inside of loops, conditions, or nested functions. If you have to use them, there's an exception, you have to create your own custom hooks. I'm not going to be talking about custom hooks. Again, if you want to create your own, you could do so. There are ways to do it. I just want to mention it here as well. So another one is, I mentioned about using different, you can use state as many times as you want in a function. However, if you use UseState here, I've used UseState here, and then it has a name with Mary, and I'm also calling this name here, right? So if I have to, React relies on the order of hooks that are called. So as long as you have it in order, if you don't have this name here and you're trying to use it down here in this use effect, it's not going to show up, it's going to complain. So make sure that if you can use as many use states and use effects inside a function, but make sure that you have the order which React really relies on. So now let's talk about handling events. In HTML, you pass them as a string, right, for a click event. In React, you would pass it as a JSX. So you would be using a camel case in this case. And then another difference is that you cannot return false to prevent default behavior in React. You must specifically use default prevent default method. I would be showing this in the code along in a very few moment. It's a synthetic event. It's been supported by React, so you don't have to worry about cross-browser compatibility. So when would you use this? Whenever you want to, if you want to prevent submitting an empty form, like a blank form, that's when you would use this. And we'll be, doing a code along, and you'll be using this. So now let's see an example of how conditional rendering works in React. So here I have three components. So the greeting component, what does it do is it sees whether it has a condition. If the user is logged in, it returns a particular user greeting, like welcome back. And then otherwise it returns as guest greeting, which is please sign up, which is what it's showing up. So if I go ahead and set this to true, it's going to show welcome back. So this is how conditional rendering works in React. So now we have come to the end of this whole talk. We'll just do a small code along, and this is what we will be doing. You'll be creating a small to-do list, and we'll have a couple of buttons you can add. You will see how you can add a new item to the list. You can mark them as complete, and then you can delete it. So if you want to fork this, I can just share this in the chat. Oh, Bill, did I share it with you? I think I did. So let me share it to everyone in the meeting room. So this is a small code along that I'm going to be showing. And I've gone ahead and created, I have added a screenshot of this. So this is how it's going to look. And then I've gone ahead and removed everything inside of all the gibberish here. There were a lot of comments, so I removed them. And I created a folder with a couple of JSX files. And note that in some projects you would see the extension as JSX. Some people use JS. It depends purely. It depends on your team or whoever is using it. I try to keep it as JSX because I know the difference. It's like here it's showing me the React icon. So here is I've gone ahead and created an object with the use state. So these are a default object that will show in the application. Now let's go ahead and add functionality to this, right? So first off, we need to be able to add a list, right? So let's go ahead and add a function to it. Say const add to do. Then what does it take? It takes sorry, we have an error function here which takes a text. And then what does it do? You should be able to add it. So I have Let me create a variable that's new to-dos. New to-dos, which takes all these default values. So I would go add a spread operator and then say, okay, you get all the to-dos from here, from the default one. And then you also add the ones that you are willing to add, right? Then I'm going to go call this set to do function along with the new to-dos. So we've added a, this is a function for adding a item. So now let's see if we have to add a complete. Whenever I click on this complete button, it has to strike through and say, it still has to show in the display, but then it has to strike through. So let's go ahead and create this. Complete to do. Then what does it take? This one takes an index, right? We have to, based on the index only, we can strike it off. So it takes index, and then we create a function for it, or a function for it. And then what does it do? It just, again, let's say, if this thing's in a variable, so to do along with whatever that was already there. Then how do we, what do we need to do? We need to get the index, and then we have to say this completed, right? So new to-dos, we have to get the index, and then say this completed, and then we want to set it to. So then you go ahead and update your set to-dos again. So if you have to go and add a delete functionality, what we need to do. So here we have to find, again, you have to take the index of it, and then you have to take the index and then remove it, right? So let's create a function for it. To do, I added these JSX already because this IDE does not auto complete, so I find it difficult to do JSX inside of this browser IDE. I use VS Code, which is very easy to. I have shortcuts to do that. To-dos, you're getting new to-dos here again, and then what you're getting all the to-dos from the list, and then what you do is you remove it, right? So we use a JavaScript splice method where it takes the index one, and then we can go ahead set to-dos again. Okay? So now we have all the necessary functions for the functionality. Now let's go add the styling here. So how does it have to look like in the, if you go ahead and see in the CSS, I've added a CSS here with the class names, which we'll be using inside of the to-do and the to-do form as well. So let's create a div. This one does not let me, it doesn't autocomplete, so I kind of suck at using this. So here, go ahead, let's do a class name. Note that I'm using camel case. Here I've added to do for, I think I added to do, right? Yes. And then what are we going to do? we are going to add some styling. How do we do this? We wanted to add some, whenever we try to do a, let's do some text. Text declaration, is that how it is? Yeah, I think so. Should be that is completed. So then if it is completed, then you have to say line through. Otherwise, leave it blank, right? So, and then you have to use this text, the JSX here, and then we'll do a couple of buttons here. Button on click. Yeah. What do we have to do? We have to get, for completed ones, we need to strike to, right? Completed to do. Yes. And then with that, you get the index of it, right? So once it's done, you have to, what button is this? It says completed. And then you close this button back. I'm very poor at using this one inside. Just copy. I'm going to add this to, oh, did I mess up something? This is for remove. Messing something. Let's open it. This should be done. Oh yeah. So this declaration. Oh, yes, I missed this. So note that you have to give this in two curly braces whenever you're trying to do styling through this. So this is where VS Code comes handy. So next, now let's go ahead and create what the form itself. So what we have to do here is where we are going to use, we'll be using hooks. So let's see, how do you use it? So first off, we need to create a hook. So let's say the hook would have a value, right? And then we need to know, we need to get the set value of what it is. And then use UseEffect, use state of blank, because we are already getting it. First, to begin with, it's going to be empty. So this is where we'll be handling the blank form submission. So we add a function for it, handle, submit. We've used all these things before, so I know that I will be messing up with the JSX, so I kind of filled it before. We create an event, and then this event, what does it do? It takes event default, right? And then we can say inside of this, we can say, hey, if value is not, it's not there, then we can return alert, say, what do you have to say? Hey, hey, add an item, right? So now it's all coming up together, right? So once you're done, start with that. What do you have to do? You have to return the rest, right? Add to do of value, and then you can say set value. So, ta-da. So if you see, let's see. When I was testing this last time, this thing was not working. Let's see if it works. So I'm trying to, so now it shows up an alert saying that, hey, add an item, and then using this handle submit method. And whenever I try to add one, let's go ahead and say add an item. So you can add one. Now let's see, let's delete one. Delete is not working. Why? Let's refresh this page. Come on. Okay. How about this? This is not working as well. Let's go ahead and see. I know I did last time some mistake here. Why is it not working? Good. Does anybody see anything that is odd here? Let's go ahead and see this. What did I do? To this. Right, I think last time it was working before. So today's. Let's see. What does our error say? Untick 17. What did I do? Okay, this is, I expected this. Complete. Because when I was testing this, I did this mistake too. Let's see.
The on click, I think.
I am messing up with something, right?
Yeah, the error says on click line 9.
Oh yeah, I haven't, line 9, yes.
I think it's saying it should be C uppercase.
This one?
Button on click function.
Oh yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Oh, sorry. Now let's refresh this. Sorry about that. This is why you need to use VS Code, where it gives you all the info. It gives you option to. Oh, now it's deleting. And now let's see why we are not able to strike through. Right? Is my text declare decoration line through it? Looks good. What is that I'm missing here?
Does the C to completed need to be capitalized? I wonder.
No. Oh, this one?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, thanks a lot. So yeah, sorry. So this is a small one. A lot of typos, sorry about that. I usually use VS Code. Okay, now, if you can see my screen, let's move to this thing. And then we completed this small one. Sorry about that. I made a lot of typos in here and I couldn't type. So now let's move on to the last part of it. So we talked a lot about the core features. We talked about JSX. What is it? It's JavaScript syntax extension. Nothing but writing HTML and JS together. Please use VS Code. Do not use this browser ID where you will make a lot of mistakes. You don't get any prompts as well. So how did we render elements? Rendering elements happens through React DOM.render method. What is a component? It's a piece of, think of it as a puzzle piece. It's a reusable piece of UI. And we talked about lifecycle component. We talked about the basic hooks. And finally, we wrapped it up with the handling, events, and conditional rendering. if you, with this knowledge, you can try to build something like this. And like how we did this, we created a button and the test alert, but you can also try to insert some images. And this, with this knowledge, you can definitely be able to do that. So what would be the next step? From here, you can take React knowledge to the next level. You can learn how to create custom hooks. And also, I would say that if you are trying to explore more on the use concept, try to learn higher order components before you use context as well. And then you can explore backend. And if you are a person who's a mobile enthusiast, you can also try developing mobile apps using React Native. So with that said, thank you so much. And please connect with me in LinkedIn. And if you can follow me in Twitter, that'll be great too.